Let's see. Okay, girls, welcome to another week of the SCA class on Midrash on the Perasha. This week we're going to look at Perashat Eqeb. Okay, so girls, to start the class, just to let you know, tonight's class, there are going to be a number of very interesting mishalim. Just to introduce a mashal, like some mishalim you might have learned in Navi. A mashal, right? It's a parable. It's a story that teaches a lesson through its comparisons to the actual example and story that we are learning. So in order to understand the first midrash of this week's Perasha that we're going to study, we have to look at the Pesukim that end the last week's Perasha and that starts this week's Perasha, okay? So we're in Perashat Eqeb, right? The Perashat starts off, anyone want to read? Vaya Eqeb Tishme'un? Any takers? Anyone want to read? Okay, I'll Vaya Eqeb Tishme'un et HaMishpatim ha'eleh. When, right, Eqeb is like at the heels at, but it means that you've obeyed the rules. So when you listen to the mitzvot and you do them in the mishpatim, V'shamar Adonai Elohecha lecha et haberit ve'et hachesed asher nishba' la'avotecha. So God will keep the berit and the chesed that He swore to your forefathers, and He'll bless you and He'll make you special and important. In the end of last week's Perasha, we learned something fairly similar. We didn't, but if you read the Perasha, there was something fairly similar at the end of last week's Perasha. And it says follows, that because God loves you, He took you out of Egypt, and you should know, and everyone look at this pasuk, V'yada'ta ki Adonai Elohecha hu ha'Elohim ha'el ha'ne'eman, right? You should know that God is the God. He is the trustworthy God. Very important word here. Ha'el ha'ne'eman. He is the trustworthy God. Shomer haberit ve'achesed. Remember those words we just spoke about in the beginning of this week's Perasha? V'shamar et haberit ve'et hachesed. We said that at the end of last week's Perasha as well. Shomer haberit ve'achesed. He keeps the berit and chesed for those that follow His mitzvot for 1,000 generations, meaning he pays back those who follow His mitzvot. And He pays back those who don't follow His mitzvot. So now, the Midrash says as follows. Ma ketiv lematla. It says before, again, Pesukim that we just read, V'yada'ta ki Adonai Elohecha hu Elohim ha'el ha'ne'eman. We're speaking about the God who is ne'eman. He is trustworthy. Midrash says, Amar b'chya barabba lema hadaba domer. Remember, the rabbis liked speaking in meshalim. The Rambam mentioned that in the first class that we had about Midrash, that the Hachamim love speaking in parables because it helped a person understand the message conveyed through a story, right? We like stories. As humans, we like stories. We like interesting stories that paint certain pictures for us. So here's the story. Le'ohavon shel melech she'ifkid eslo pikadon. Right? The beloved of the king, he comes to the king, he says, King, I want you to watch this important thing for me, okay? Watch my phone for me. Watch over my special gems for me. Whatever he gave him. Umet ohavo shemelech. And now this beloved person of the king, this friend of the king died. Babeno, the son of the friend of the king, comes. And he says, King, I want that item back that you're watching for me. Amar lo ten li apikadon shifkid ava eslecha. Amar lo amelech masata aher tov mimeni. He says, the king says, excuse me, son of my friend, right? Son of my loyal friend. Did you find anyone better than me to watch over your belonging? Hapikadon she'esli, lo shamarti oto v'lo kipalti oto. Did I not watch over and guard and keep the item that you gave to me to watch? Says the Midrash. Kach kishehateu Yisrael b'imei Yirmiyah. In the times of Yirmiyah, the people were sinning. And so Hashem told Yirmiyah, Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yirmiyah, Lech emor lahem liYisrael. Go tell Bnei Yisrael. Ma masu avotechem bi'avel. What bad did your forefathers find in me? Nothing. Everything I promised, I did. Al kol ma shenishbati lavotechem lo kiyamti. Anything that I promised to your forefathers, did I not fulfill it? The same thing as the mashal, where he has to watch over this item for his good friend. And the son says, I want it back. Like, what? Did I not fulfill my promise? And did I not fulfill what I was going to do good enough? Nishbati lahem she'ani mevarechet benehem. I swore to them that I would bless their children. Shene'emar. Girls, anyone know where this is from? Ki barecha barechecha. Anyone know where this pasuk is from in the Chumash? Who was told Ki barecha barechecha?
Abraham.
Good. Abraham. In the Akedah, very good, Lord. In Akedah Ishak, Abraham was told Ki barecha barechecha. I will bless you and your children. Lo berachti etchem ayedem Moshe. But these are questions, like rhetorical questions. Lo berachti otam ayedem Moshe. Did I not bless them through Moshe? Shene'emar Adonai Elohechem nidba etchem. Like it says, God blessed you. He did. Amarti lo she'ani mosi etchem birchush gadol. Amarti lo. I told Avraham in Berit ben Abetarim that I will take out the people, your nation, with a lot of riches. Shene'emar be'aharechen yeseu birchush gadol. Lo asiti kach. Did I not do that? I did do that. When you left Egypt, I took you out a lot of money. Not only does it say it in Shemot, it says it in Tehillim. Who wants to read this pasuk? Vayosiem. Someone read this pasuk. Wonderful pasuk to read. Okay, I'll read it. I took them out with money, with silver, with gold, and no one was faltering. Therefore Moshe says, remember the psukim we started the class with, that we said, God loves us, and He's so loyal to us, and He's ne'eman, He's so trustworthy, that He kept His shevu'ah asher nishba lavotechem, and He took you out mibet avadim yad paro melech Mitzrayim. God is trustworthy. At yodea shehu ha'el ha'ne'eman. From the fact that it says that He took us out of Egypt and He kept His shevu'ah, we know that He's a trustworthy God. Now, this idea of trustworthiness, okay? We learn, it says the Midrash, very interestingly enough, we could learn this from human beings, right? On the most basic level, girls, when you act in the way that the Torah commands and other people see that, they know that it's a reflection of God, right? When you use your Selem Elokim, to function as a godly type of person in the way emulating God, you in essence show people what God is like. Okay? Even more than that, when you see humans acting in ways that God says He will act, you can learn from that what God is like. And here's an example. Rabbanan Amreh, the rabbi said, Me'emunato shel basar v'adam, from the trustworthiness of humans, at yodea emunato shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. from people that are trustworthy, and you probably met people in your life like this who are trustworthy, you can trust to follow through on their words that they gave to you. Here's a very interesting story. And I can't verify if this story happened in reality or not, if it's part of a mashal, I don't know. But it seems like this is a real story. The story of a rabbi named Pinchas ben Yair. He was living in a city in the south. And people went to go do business there. They had in their hands a se'ah is a huge measurement of se'orim, of barley. They left it by him. They forgot that they left it by him. They left it for him to watch. Now, what do you do, girls? Someone leaves something by you that requires attention, right? It requires you watching over it, tending to it, right? Here is like se'ina se'orim is like tons of barley that needs to be watched over and planted and threshed and gathered together and watched over. And look what he did. Every year he would plant them, make a threshing floor out of them, and then gather them into the storage houses. 7 years later, what could the rabbi argue after 7 years? They come back after 7 years. What could he argue?
That it's his.
It's mine. Not only that, more than that. Maybe he can argue two things. One is he could say it's mine. Two, he could say, listen, I'll give you back the original barley value of what you gave me 7 years ago. But all of the produce that came as a result of me planting it and threshing it and gathering it, I'm not going to give that to you. That's my investment. Look what he does. They came there, litba otan liten lahem. He recognized them right away. Amar lahem bo'u utlu osrotechem. You know what he tells them? Come take your storage houses. Come, collect. 7 years later, here, everything, and look what I did to it. I magnified it. That reminds us of God's promise to Abraham. Right? That reminds us. No worries, I'll repeat that again. So these people come and they give this rabbi, they leave it by him to watch over some, to do business. And they have some grains with them to do business, to sell wheat and barley. And they left by him a certain amount of barley. And he do. 7 years, they left it by him. They forgot to take it back from him when they were doing their business. And now, 7 years later, they come back and say, oh my God, we left it by you. Can we have it back? And he says, of course you can have it back. Not only that, come take all of the storage houses. I took all your grains and I made tons of barley storage houses out of your grains. I threshed it and I pressed it and I made good fine barley out of what you gave me, out of the grains that you gave me. Midrash says from here we learn the trustworthiness of God. God promised, for example, to Abraham, right? I'm going to watch over this promise for you. I promise your children will leave birchush gadol. Sometimes we don't see what God promises us. We don't see the value or the result of it. This story was 7 years later, this example that's given in the story, years later, and they're collecting on it. He's trustworthy. This rabbi is trustworthy enough that the people were able to come back and not only get what they originally gave to him, but whatever he did with it, he gave to them also. The same thing with God. God is ne'eman. God is trustworthy. And he's so trustworthy that years later, he will come through on his promise to us. Is that clearer? If there's any questions on that, please feel free to ask. No problem. Okay, so that's one. There's another story. Here we go. This is another story. Veshuv, another story of this rabbi. He goes to a city. And right, mice were eating within the city. They came to the rabbi to try to find out what to do. What did he do? Amar lahem, lama en atem mafrishin ma'asorotechem karaui. Why aren't you giving ma'asir? Remember, ma'asir requires a person to give part of their produce, right, to, who knows, girls? Who do you give ma'asir to?
Kohanim. No,
so Kohanim get, no, so there is a ma'asir for the poor, very good. So terumah is given to the Kohen, ma'asir is given to the Levi, and there is a ma'asir ani, Lori, like you said, that you give to the ani. He says, why don't you give that? If you give your ma'asir, the achbarim won't eat any more of your produce. Again, this is the idea of God's ne'emanut, that we have to trust him. We have to trust in him, that when it comes to giving our ma'asrot or our tzedakah, it's hard for us, right? We have to take money that's in our wallet and say, here, Kohen, here, Levi, here to the poor person, right? Orphan, widow. Difficult, very difficult to do. But the Midrash teaches that we don't realize the other end of it. We don't realize it comes along with it, that when God is happy with us, these punishments aren't happening. Again, we're not doing it because of the reward, but the reality is that when we're functioning in line with what God wants, we will see positive. Not always right away. It might take time. And in this story, Aravotam behalchu achbarim lo niru'on, right? They gave their ma'asrot, they did it like they were supposed to, and they didn't see it. But I think the point here is the idea of following the berit of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? And there's one more story here with this rabbi. Davar acher, ma'aseh be'adam echad, shaya chofer shihin larabim. He'd be digging up reservoirs for the public to be able to have water. Bito hayta holechet baderech, ubat la'avor banahar ushtafa. His daughter was walking, and she came to pass by the river, and the river blew her away. Ba'u ve'amru lo, and Rabbi Pinchas, kach higia lebito shel peloni. Does the daughter of this person deserve that punishment? He helps people with water. Why should she die with water? Amar lahem iyef. He says, no, that's not possible. Kevan shaya oseh resono shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'mayim, en HaKadosh Baruch Hu me'abed bito b'mayim. Goes, hold on one moment. So the rabbi says in the story, remember, the daughter of this person who helps people get water died by water. And he says, the rabbi says, it can't be. Kevan shehu osaya oseh resono shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'mayim, en HaKadosh Baruch Hu me'abed bito b'mayim. Right? God would not let that to happen. Miyad, right away, nafla sevaha ba'ir, ba'ata bito shel peloni. All of a sudden, a scream came out that the daughter of this person is alive. Now, I don't know if that happened, that she was really dead, or either way, look what the rabbis say. Amru rabotenu kevan she'amar Pinchas be'ha'ir kach, yarad malach ve'ela ota. I think the purpose of this midrash is to say that he was such a trustworthy person, and God respected him so much because of that, that even a miracle could happen because of this rabbi. Because when you're ne'eman, when you're trustworthy, and you're a person that can be relied upon, it's crucial, very crucial. Okay, any questions on that?
I have a question.
Sure.
How do we apply like that trait to our lives practically? Like, what does it entail?
So think about it practically. Okay? It's very hard within life, and especially in the world of constant back and forth and business, to really always follow through on your commitments. I'll give you the most basic one that sometimes I struggle with. You make a donation to a Bet Knesset or to an organization, and sometimes it takes time to pay, but you make your commitment and then people don't follow through their commitments. Or you promise someone, I'll give you something very simple, very basic. You give your word to someone that you're going to spend time with them. This is the hardest one. And something happens, you can't follow through, but you give your word, right? Right? When you give your word to somebody and you give your word over to someone to do something, and you don't follow that, you lose your trustworthiness. People don't trust you then. They can't rely on you. Yes, I'll work on this project and I'll help you out. 5 years later, there's no help on that project, right? You tell your friend I'll help you with something. And we're not talking about special circumstances. Usually, when you give your word that you're going to be someone like that. In this example, he went above and over the top. He made sure to watch over something of someone for a really long time and give it back to them. Also something very, very, I think it's a character trait that the Tanakh says that not many people have, unfortunately. And God asks it of us, or to work on it. Is that a little clearer?
Yeah, thank you.
Now, different midrash. This is a very nice one. I don't have all the answers to this midrash, but I think it's a great midrash to think about and to consider for, just something to keep in your mind. Maybe you can find an answer one day. But I think the beauty of it is in what we get out of it. Davar aher. Pasuk says, V'shamar Adonai Elohecha lecha et haberit. It says, God will watch over all the berachot he's going to give us. Mahu v'shamar. What does that mean he's going to watch over it? Amar Rabbi Shemuel bar Nachman. Kol ma sheyisrael ochlim ba'olam hazeh mikoach haberachot sheberecham bil'am harasha. All that Israel ate in this world, meaning all that we get, all the reward we get in this world, is from the berachot of Bil'am. But the berachot sheberechu otan ha'avot, the berachot that the avot got from God, mishumarin hen le'atid lavo. Those berachot are going to come in the future, maybe in Mot HaMashiach, maybe in Olam Haba, shene'emar V'shamar Adonai Elohecha lecha. Fascinating midrash. That anything that we're getting right now is a result of Bil'am's berachot. But God's berachot, we haven't really seen them yet. The power of God's berachot have not been revealed to us yet. They're being held for a future time. That's like, I'm going to compare this to the midrash that says that we get light every day from the sun, the or. But there's a future vision that the or that we're going to get will be directly from God. They say that that's the or of the first day of creation, right? There was a hidden light. The idea being that there's something bigger that we haven't seen, something grand. Is that clear? Any questions on that? Now there's a mash, yeah. Sure. So which part? Just tell me which part. I'll go over that again, not a problem. Just tell me which part I should go over, and I don't mind repeating it again. The second part about the light, or about the berachot of Bil'am versus in the future. Okay. So in the last part, I mentioned that there is a very interesting midrash, which seems like from the Navi, there's a little peshat in it, that the light that we have today is from the sun. But in the future, there's a nevuah that says, Lo yavo od shimshech virechech lo yasef, ve'ayta Adonai lach le'or olam. God will be our eternal light. There is a future prophecy that God will be our light. And that reminds me of the fact that on day 1 there was light, but there was no sun yet. On day 4 there was sun. So some Mefarshim say over there, Midrashim, that there's a light that will come in the future that we haven't seen yet. That will be the light of God that will shine on us. Like the berachot over here that will shine on us in the future, that we haven't seen the power of them yet. We've only seen the power of the berachot of Bil'am Harasha, not the berachot yet that God promised. Interesting midrash. Good. Now, midrash continues. Another story. What's this idea of watching over the berit? He says, I'll give you a mashal, Rabbi Hilbo says. I'll give you a parable. A lot of good stories to come home with. Oh, you're home already, but usually I say that to class when you're actually out of class. Liatom shehaya mitgadel esel bal habayit. There was an orphan who was living by this person's house. He's raising him. Haya ochel mishelo, veshote mishelo, umitkase mishelo. He would eat from his food, he would drink from his drink, and he would take clothing from his house. Velimedo umanut, and he would teach him a profession. Otoa yatom omer. This orphan said, Kol ma shani ochel veshote umitkase mitoch sechari hu mehashebo. Okay? All of what I eat and drink and clothe in is from my sachar. He's going to deduct that from my salary of what I'm working, right? Because he taught him a profession. So he says, whatever salary he's going to pay me, he's going to deduct from that what I'm eating, what I'm drinking, and my clothing. Good? What did this person who's raising? I'm actually going to go back and repeat what I just mentioned because I think it's important. Hello. The mashal, you entered in the middle of the mashal, so I'm going to go back to the beginning of the mashal. There was an orphan who was being raised by this person, and he was eating from his house, drinking from his house, and as well taking from his clothing. He was clothing himself from this person. This person was taking care of this orphan. And he taught him a profession. And the orphan said that anything that I eat and drink and clothe in, this person is going to deduct from my salary, right? Whatever salary I get for my job that he's teaching me, he's going to deduct it. Says this person to the orphan who's raising him, Amar lo oto ba'al habayit hayecha, I swear, kol ma she'ata ochel umitkaseh. Whatever you eat and clothe in, bechoach habit shel mayim she'amimale li, bechoach etz echad she'ta mevakeh li. That is in return from you getting me water or from you cutting me trees for fire. Aval secharecha sarur umunach li lach. Your reward, your real reward for working for what I taught you, for the profession, that is kept for you. Meaning, I'm watching over for you, don't worry about it. That will go in your bank account, quote unquote. Okay, in your bank account for you to keep, don't worry, I'm not going to deduct that from you. Says the Midrash, says Rabbi Hilbo. Kach, this parable is similar to Kol ma Yisrael ochlim ba'olam hazeh. Whatever we get in this world, the physical things in this world, bechoach hayisurin shehen ba'im alehem. That's coming because any punishments or bad things that happen to us. Aval, after the orphan says he's going to pay the owner back says, no, that money is yours. He says the money's yours to keep. The same thing in Bnei Israel. Whatever you got in this world, that's payback for any bad things that happen to you. Aval secharan, but your real reward, sarur shumar le'ati lavo. Your real reward will come in the future. Again, either in the future time of this world, of Yemot HaMashiach, or in Olam Haba, because the Pasuk says, Veshamar Adonai Elohecha lecha. It's like a bank account of what God has in store for us is so much bigger than what we think. We think we might be rewarded, but our great reward is yet to come as long as we're following the mitzvot in the Torah. Now, what does that mean that God is going to keep the berit and the chesed? So the Midrash says over here, would anyone like to read this? Umahu et berit ve'et chesed. What does that mean, that God's going to watch the berit and the chesed?
I could read. Where are we?
Over here. Umahu et berit ve'et chesed.
Okay.
Let me just
Wait.
pull it up. There, go. Yep, right there, the blue.
Okay. Umahu et habrit ve'et chesed. Amar Rabbi Chia shlosha midot tovot yesh b'yad Yisrael. ואלו הן ביישנים ורחמנים וגומלי חסדים. ביישנים מנין שנאמר ובעבור תהיה יראתו על פניכם. רחמנים מנין שנאמר ונתן לך רחמים ורחמך. גומלי חסדים מנין שנאמר ושמר השם אלוקיך לך את הברית ואת החסד.
Okay, so it says that there are 3 midot tovot of Bnei Israel. That is, we are baishanim, right? That one of our positive things is that we have proper awe and we understand that position in reference to God. Rahmanim, because it says that God will give us rahamim and He will have compassion to us. And we are gomle hasadim. We do good to others. How do we know? Because the pasuk that we just read in Perashat Eqeb says, Veshamar Adonai Elohecha lecha et haberit ve'et hachesed, that we are going to be kept by God, the berit and the chesed. And the Midrash says that means that God's going to keep our berit because of the fact that we do chesed. Because we do chesed, God does chesed to us. Right? Right, just like we do rahamim, God does rahamim for us. So that's the way the Midrash looks at this pasuk, that God will give us chesed because we do chesed to others. Good? Now, this last one is my favorite. It's probably one of my more favorite Midrashim that I've read in the past few years. I happen to love this next Midrash, so try to pay careful attention to this one. We're going to end with this Midrash. I just really, really love what comes out of this Midrash. Davar acher, v'shamar Adonai Elohecha lecha et haberit ve'et hachesed. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Halafta, lema hadavar domeh. What is this comparable to? Lemelech shenasa lematrona. A king married a very fitting woman, a very fitting wife. V'hichnisa lo shenayim arisim, and she brought to him two. Let me just get the right translation of this word because it's an important translation. I have it here. I got it from the Joshua Dictionary. The translation is as follows. Here we go. 2 emblems that are put into like a ring or a necklace. That's what she brought, right? When people get married, they bring with them some whatever belongings they have. So she brought into this relationship these 2 emblems. Af hamelech zakaf lah kenegdan shene arisim. So the king set for her 2 emblems to correspond to her 2 emblems. Okay? We got it so far? Good. Now, Ibeda Matrona Etchela. She lost her 2 emblems. Af Hamelech Natal Etchelo. So the king took back his 2 emblems that he gave to her. Okay? So remember this, there were 4 emblems at some point, 2 of hers and 2 that she was given from the king to correspond to her 2. And she lost hers, he took his back. Le'ahar yamim, days later, Ameda v'chishirat asma ve'hevia otan shene arisin. Now she either finds them, locates them, remakes them. She brings back the 2 emblems. Af hamelech hevia chelo. So the king says to her, fine, here are your 2 back as well from me. And he says, Amar hamelech elu va'elu ye'asu atara. Let's make a crown out of these 4 emblems. Ve'yitenu berosha shel matrona. And let's put them on the head of this woman that he has as a wife. Meaning, let's see what this means. Kach ata mose Avraham, natan lebanav shene arisim. Avraham gave to his children 2 emblems. What are the 2 emblems? Well, because it says in the pasuk, Ki edativ leman asher yesabeh banav bepetuah harav. Girls, what are the 2 emblems? It doesn't mention the 2 emblems here. Who knows the rest of that pasuk? What is Avraham going to teach his children? What 2 important values that are considered emblems is he going to teach his children, that he taught his children and his household? Dead silence. Okay, those 2 are tzedakah umishpat. Okay, the 2 emblems that Avraham gave over to his children to enter into relationship with God were tzedakah mishpat. Righteousness, tzedakah, and mishpat, justice. Af hakadosh baruch hu zakaf lahem kenegdam shene arisin. So God says, fine, you come with these 2 beautiful emblems, I'll give you 2 beautiful emblems. Hesed v'rahamim. Shene'emar, because it says, V'shamar Adonai Elohecha lecha et haberit v'et ha'chesed. God will watch over the berit and the hesed to Bnei Israel. And it says, V'natan lecha rahamim v'rihamcha, and he's going to give us rahamim, meaning corresponding to tzedakah mishpat, come chesed and rachamim. What did Bnei Israel do in this relationship? Girls, someone answer, to compare it to the parable. What did Bnei Israel do in this relationship? Wrong.
Tzedakah mishpat.
Well, they didn't do tzedakah mishpat, right? They lost, right? Just like the woman, the wife who lost her 2 emblems, Bnei Israel lost their 2 emblems. How do we know? The pasuk says in Amos, "Hafachtem lerosh mishpat ufri tzedakah lela'ana." You turned mishpat into poison and tzedakah into wormwood, meaning you poisoned tzedakah mishpat. You got rid of it. You perversed it. You went against it. So what did God do? It says God took back his 2 emblems. How do we know that? And by the way, the Midrash here, the knowledge of the Midrash to be able to connect all these Pesukim is superb. There's a Pasuk in Yirmiyah that says that God gathered his Shalom and he took back his Hesed and Rahamim. It's a Pasuk in Yirmiyah. Let's read the Pasuk. Pasuk says that God withdrew his favor and he withdrew his Hesed and Rahamim from Bnei Israel. He withdrew it. He took it back. Now, girls, what would it take for us to get back God's Hesed and Rahamim if we're following the story of the parable that the Midrash is bringing here? How would we get back God's Hesed and Rahamim? No one? Come on, remember the parable. How did the woman get back the king's 2 emblems? I want to make sure everyone hears me also. Girls, at least a thumbs up if you hear me. I want to make sure everyone hears me at least. Okay, good. Very good. Very good, Deborah. She finds them. She brings them back. So what 2 things do Bnei Yisrael need to find? Which gems, emblems, what special jewels do we need to find in order to bring back our relationship with God? What are our 2 emblems? The Mishpat. And how do we know that? Because it says, Sion b'mishpat tipadeh v'shaveh b'istaka. Yerushalayim will be redeemed through justice, and the captives will return through righteousness. Okay? Af hakadosh baruch hu hevi et shelo. So when that happens, God brought back his emblems, minayin, shekach ketiv, because it says in Yeshaya, and we have to read the pasuk in Yeshaya, ki he'arim yamushu, ve'hagevaot timutena. We're going to read this haftarah sometime soon. Let me open up my chumash to see when, but I do know that this haftarah is a haftarah that we read during these 7 weeks following Tisha B'Av. The minhag is to read haftarot of what's called consolation. Haftarot of God giving us nehama about the destruction. And this is actually the haftarah for Perashat Ki Teseh. And we say the heharim yamushu, the mountains will move, and the givaot timutena, the hasti, and my chesed mi'itech lo yamush, will not move from you. Ubrit shelomi lo tamut, amar merahamech Adonai. So my chesed and rahamim with my berit will not move. Now, what's the last part of the parable? What did the king say to do with the 4 emblems? Right? To make a crown out of them for her. Girls, we're talking about 4 different things. Tzedakah, Mishpat, Chesed, and Rahamim. Who wears 4 things on their head? Right? What is that known as? What are the 4 things on the head known as? Right? Well, tefillin, and let me bring that up one moment. Tefillin is known as a crown, an atara. And if you've ever seen the shel rosh of tefillin, specifically the rosh of the tefillin, has 4 compartments in it. Right? There are 4 parashiot in the tefillin. Midrash is saying that the crown of Bnei Yisrael that God said that Bnei Yisrael could wear is the tefillin. As long as we're following our tzedakah mishpat, God will give us chesed and rahamim. So these 4 compartments, although those are the 4 parashiot, Kadesh li, v'haya ki bi'acha, Shema, and v'hayim shamoa, the concept behind this midrash is we will only have that atara, that crown, as long as we're following the tzedakah mishpat. Ends the midrash with the following pesukim, that actually, when boys and men put on tefillin and they wrap their middle finger, when I wrap my middle finger in the morning of the tefillin, I say the following: Ve'erastich li le'olam, ve'erastich li besedek u'mishpat hezv v'rahamim, ve'erastich li be'emunah ve'adat Adonai. Right? One of the wraps, the second wrap, is that God proposes to us, engages us, and marries us with Sedek, Mishpat, Chesed, and Rahamim. The Midrash found this pasuk and says, look, this pasuk mentions a marriage between us and God with those 4 things: Sedek, Mishpat, Chesed, and Rahamim. And through that, there'll be emunah. We talk about ne'emanut and ne'emanut. There'll be emunah. There'll be proper faithfulness between God and Bnei Israel. Ultimately, there'll be knowledge of God. But think about that idea. We only have the crown when we're doing tzedakah mishpat. This parable is beautiful because this crown will only fit us if we're willing to do tzedakah mishpat, says the Midrash. Then we're able to get back the chesed and the rachamim of God. Girls, any questions, any comments before we end?
Do the 4 parashiot correspond to the 4 midot? Like the 4?
No, the 4 parashiot, and let me pull it up one moment if you don't mind. I actually have a very quick source sheet, just color-coded to show you one moment what I'm talking about when I say the 4 parashiot and what's in them, because that's important. Bring it up a moment. Here it is. The 4 parashiot in the tefillin, just so you could see what's in them. They're not. The parashiot and tefillin have one common thing in them, or 2. They all have the pasuk, Ve'aya lecha le'ot al yadecha, right? It should be an ot on your hands and a zikaron between your eyes. And the next parasha that's in the tefillin says, Ve'aya le'ot al yadecha tzvot b'neinecha. It'll be an ot on your yad and a tutafot between your eyes. And then we say in the Shema, Ukshartam le'ot al yadecha ve'tutafot b'neinecha. And then we say, Ve'ayim shemoa, Ukshartem otam le'ot al yadchem ve'tutafot b'neinecha. Midrash is saying that I gave you, Bnei Israel, this special mitzvah of tefillin, this crown, as long as you're following my mitzvot. V'haya im shamoa tishme'u el mitzvotai. Or as long as you're following v'shamarta et ha'chukah hazot. As long as you're following the mitzvot of what I took you out of Egypt for, then you can wear the crown. And those mitzvot, Midrash is saying, fall on the pillars of what Abraham taught us of pursuing justice and righteousness. And as long as we do that, then God will bring his other corresponding 2 emblems and essentially have the 4. It's talking about this midrash in this, parable type terms, so you can understand the idea behind it. So that when you see it, you realize, oh, God said he'll fit this crown for us. What does it mean to follow the mitzvot? Tzedakah mishpat and chesed and rachamim. Those 4 end up being the relationship between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I hope that's clearer.
Thank you.
One of my favorite midrashim now. It's on my top 10 list, I think, of midrashim, because there's a lot more going on here. Maybe a different time we can delve even deeper to this midrash. I'm hoping these many parables gave us an understanding of who God is and what God expects of us. And during this time of year following Tisha B'Av, we should spend time investing our efforts and energy in that. Thank you, girls.